After everybody was done, I asked to a man, to a woman, I said, are you excited? Are you curious about what these individuals do? And they're like, yeah, they're chomping at the bit. They're sitting on the edge of their seat. And there's something to leading with why, starting with why. Hello and welcome to my first official episode on Conversations of Excellence. My name is Pete Kohlasch. I'm a high performance coach and founder of Operating Excellence. And I couldn't be more excited for a lot of reasons, but two in particular. Number one, this series that I'm starting, Conversations of Excellence, what it's designed to do is for me to do just that, have conversations with some of the most dynamic people that I know on excellence in any arena, their health, their relationships, their business, and to bring these insights and ideas right to you. And the people that I've chosen, the way that we've structured this is designed to eliminate, I don't want to say fluff, maybe that's a little harsh, but get right at the heart of what makes this person as versatile, as dynamic as they are. And so that this way you can interpret it, you can absorb it, and ultimately what we always want to focus on is how can we help you to apply it? How can we help you to integrate it in your life so that we can make it work for you? The second reason why I'm excited is because my first guest is also one of my best friends. This is going to be a very easy conversation for us. We speak all the time, and every time we speak, I'd say about 95% of our conversation is, hey, what are you working on? What are you working toward? What are you learning? What are you absorbing? What are you applying? Where are you failing? What did you learn from that? And I'll tell you, I always hang up the phone with this gentleman, and it's just like, wow, I feel lifted. My spirits feel lifted. I feel better for having had that conversation. And I know that you will as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first guest. His name is Danny Potocki. And the way that I want to structure today's conversation, like a lot of people, when you first meet him, you say, oh, Danny, tell us, what do you do? But instead of starting with what he does, we'll get into a little bit of that. I think it's more important to borrow from our boy, Simon Sinek. And Danny, I'd like for you to jump right in with us today. And instead of saying what you do, why don't you share with us why you do what you do?
Thanks, Pete. It's great to be here with you, and I love hearing about all the exciting energy conversations you want to have to lift people up. And I'm so happy to be a part of this and in a way to try to impact mindsets and maybe, tools of other people. So I appreciate it. Why I do what I do. I think, if I had to put one word on this, it's to educate or to teach. I think, if I had to think all the way to the end of my life and my grandkids asked what I did across my life, I would hope to say I educated other people to be better. There's a lot of things that come with that. I work with entrepreneurs, students and startups and small businesses, some nonprofits. And it's a hard thing to get up every day and to build a business and to grow it. So why I'm doing it is to educate, to make it a little easier, or to help them overcome the challenges. And likewise, I want to educate the kids that my wife and I are raising, and friends and community and anyone else that's a part of that in my life in any way whatsoever. So thanks for asking and starting with that.
And for those listening today, I ran a mastermind once, and I want you to try this because I think it worked out better than I could have expected for the mastermind. And it's why we start this show with asking our guests, why do you do what you do? So I was hosting a mastermind. There's about 8 people in the room. They didn't know each other. They never met each other. So I said, hey, everybody go around the room and share your name and share why you do what you do. Don't share what you do, share why you do what you do. And sure enough, everybody goes around the room and they share why they do what they do. And after everybody was done, I asked to a man, to a woman, I said, are you excited? Are you curious about what these individuals do? And they're like, yeah, they're chomping at the bit. They're sitting on the edge of their seat. And there's something to leading with why, starting with why. The great book, Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Why you do what you do is compelling, it's intriguing, it leaves people wondering, hey, wow, so what do you do? So Danny, he says why he does what he does, educating or teaching, right? He says, I go to the end of my life, if I could educate people to be better, that will have been a great life. Formally, in terms of what Danny does, he does a lot of things, and I'd encourage you to reach out or check him out. We'll share at the end of today's episode where you can see Danny, but Danny's CEO and Managing Director of Hudson Valley Center for Innovation. They have offices in New Rochelle, New York, and Kingston, New York. And what they do is they train and they grow students, startups, and small businesses to be entrepreneurs in the new economy. He's got such a versatile, effective, dynamic approach at doing that. I absolutely am always amazed to hear what Danny's working on and what he's doing for the people that he's serving. He's also an entrepreneur in residence, which if you're scratching your head wondering exactly what that means, I was at first. He's a professor at Iona College in New Rochelle. He's a professor of entrepreneurship, and he creates a mentor community for the students. In other words, he pairs students with advisors in the community. So a lot of what Danny does, whether it's for the Hudson Valley Center for Innovation or whether it's as a professor at Iona College, again, and not surprisingly, it all aligns with him educating or teaching. And you know what's cool? And Danny doesn't know that I'm going to do this, and none of my guests, well, I guess now maybe future guests will. But what I want to do is just share one word that I associate our guest with. Today's Danny Potocki. I've known Danny for 4 or 5 years now, which isn't a terribly long stretch of time, but our connection has been intense. If I were to associate one word with Danny Potocki, it's learner.
That's great.
Yeah, it's learner because he's one of two seats every time I'm speaking with him. He's either learning something himself from philosophy, from theology, from economics, from business, from entrepreneurship, or if he's not learning something himself, he's sharing or passing on the value of what he's learned, which I think is funny and goes well with what he said in terms of why he does what he does. Danny, just share with us real quick, man. We're about halfway through the year 2021 here. What are you most grateful for this year?
What am I most grateful for this year? It's, family's a big part of everyone's life. I'm most grateful for being together with my wife and our 4 children and spending a lot of time in our community. This past year was a time to step up. So we took some opportunities to do that. But in some ways, the stepping up for us was to take care of ourselves even more. And it gave us a lot of, lessons and learnings, I guess, to use your word, on about ourselves. But really, it taking a step back that way and getting to know each other even more helped us engage our community in an even better way. So I'm most grateful for having been together with family and, specifically my wife and 4 children.
Did I hear you say that learning, whether it's you individually or learning as a family, your wife and your 4 children, helps you to serve better when you're out in the community, and serving better or being out in the community helps you to learn and be better individually and with your family? Is that a fair conclusion for what you just shared?
Yeah, it's great that you bring it up this way. I mean, one thing that I could mention is, a lot of the areas that you've mentioned, philosophy, theology, things I've studied, economics, business, entrepreneurship, things that I do in my own sort of restoration work on a daily basis. I read a lot of poetry. A huge poet that I'm totally into and recommend is Mary Oliver, specifically Devotions, which is a collection of her poems. She would say something like, spend the time in nature to restore yourself so that when you go out and engage people in work, or we might say vocation or career, it's going to make you better, right? So it's almost like that ounce of solitude or that silence away from the busyness will make you a better engager in that busyness. She calls it, Mary Oliver, by the way, calls it the daily presentations. Be mindful of all of the grateful things in your daily presentation of life, things that you should notice and carry that with you. So if I'm with people with that mindset, I'm going to try to notice the small things about them, like I would try to notice the blossom or the goldfinch on the tree. And if you could pick up on little things like that, you get to know people better. It's more dialogue, more engagement, more relationship. I think that's a big part of life.
You can probably guess why my word association with Danny was learner. I mean, he really does. And I think if you have that inquisitive always learning mindset, always something to be absorbed or gained from every experience, good, bad, right, left, up, down, life becomes boundless. And at least I think it becomes fun as well. So that's why I always enjoy speaking with Danny, because he's always challenged me to look at things from a different perspective than perhaps I otherwise would have. So I ask you, what are you most grateful for this year? Let me ask you this, two of my favorite questions. What are you most excited about? What are you working on right now, or what are you working toward that you're most excited about?
I'll say generally building a team. So actually, in the past 2 days, I've hired two people to come on and expand our team even more at the Hudson Valley Center for Innovation. And doing that every day and bringing people on with something that, really started with myself and one other person. And now it's, groups and groups of people. It's a big motivator for me. Um, some people might even see it as taking some of your responsibility and giving it to someone else and enabling to sort of run with that. Because as entrepreneurs, you start with this really long list of doing things all the time, every day. Sometimes it feels like 24/7. It adds a lot of stress to life at times. But, I see it now more as enabling creativity. Obviously, that needs to be aligned with, business objectives and assets and investments and things like that. But man, you'd be surprised, right? When you bring people onto a team and they even make the team mission better and more clear and more dynamic. So I love that. And I want to continue doing that. And that only means, that clients are asking us to do more and we're finding new opportunities to do more. When I was 25, I joined my first startup. My wife, Kim, and I moved down to DC and we joined a tech startup. And I spent until the age about 34, around that time, 34, working in startups down in that area. And I learned from one of the COOs of one of those startups that really hiring people is about taking care of families. It's obviously delivering for the clients and the partners, but what you're really doing from a company perspective is enriching families. And I love that. I always tried to carry that with me, and I want to treat as many people as possible as part of my team. Take care of them in that way. So thanks for that. That's a good question. I'm looking forward to other people's responses on that too.
The first two questions that I've asked you, albeit very simple, I think are also very profound for those listening today. I asked them, hey, what are you grateful for? I asked them, hey, what are you excited about? And I'll tell you, at any turn in life, at any point in your life, if you can find yourself somewhere between gratitude and excitement or anticipation, life will be all right. And so my encouragement to you, when I speak with clients, those are the first two questions that I ask them every single session. Hey, share with me one thing that you're really soulfully grateful for. Oh, that's awesome. Hey, share with me one thing that you're excited about and working toward. And now some of the clients that I work with, they prepare in advance because they know I'm going to ask that. But for you, let's not hope or wish that we find ourselves somewhere between gratitude and anticipation. Let's try and be more deliberate with building that in. Let's have a gratitude practice where we're being a little bit more intentional with acknowledging and celebrating that gratitude, right? Whatever we're doing, likely we're trying to generate greater abundance in our lives, whether that exists in money or love or spirituality or knowledge or wisdom, whatever it is, we're searching for greater abundance. And I think in order for us to attract and build greater abundance, we must acknowledge and celebrate the abundance that already exists. So I think gratitude is such a powerful force. I know a lot of our listeners are probably well attuned to that. And then what are you excited about? Right? If you're at a point in your life where there isn't that feeling or emotion of anticipation is such a powerful force, right? A lot of folks live the entirety of their days and their lives push, push, push. Everything is effort, effort, effort. And yeah, that's the big piece of the puzzle. But when you're looking forward to something, when you're excited about something, when there's the element of anticipation in your life, it creates a pull force for you, which is a multiplier. So, for you, for whoever's listening today, my encouragement to you, how do you build a more deliberate gratitude practice? How do you build anticipation as a key element or force in your arsenal or your repertoire? So Danny, I appreciate you sharing that with us today. If the core of our conversation, I'm just chomping at the bit to jump in with you on, Obviously, this being conversations of excellence, I asked Danny before we got started today, I say, hey, if you're having a conversation about excellence, what are three things that have to be a part of that conversation? And every single guest that I invite on, I ask them the same question. I think what's going to be really amazing is how many different people interpret excellence differently and how many people draw from different sources. So I asked Danny again, Danny, if you're having a conversation about excellence, what are the three things that have to be a part of that conversation? Danny, what did you share with me?
I think conversation of excellence, or even just talking about excellence itself, whether it's from a classics perspective, right? If you're studying humanities or you're trying to live better every day, I'm going to propose simplicity, dialogue, and habit. Doesn't necessarily mean it's in the order, but if you asked me even of that list to double down on, it's got to be simplicity.
Wow. Okay. So you just elevated out of the three. You're elevating simplicity to that sort of higher echelon. So he sent me this message. I asked him the question, hey, in preparation for our conversation on excellence, hey, what are three things that have to be a part of the conversation? Danny says simplicity, dialogue, and habit. And I'm immediately intrigued. I think all these words, all these elements in life are so important. I'm intrigued to hear what Danny has to say about it. So let's start with what you say is the most important. You said simplicity. Everybody understands the word, but I guess tell us, why is this so meaningful to you?
I'll give maybe some context first. I think some other folks might use the word clarity for simplicity. I think people might use the word driver or passion for simplicity. I think some folks might use the word essential or minimal for simplicity. Um, what I really mean by it is humility. I think the more simple something is, the more profound it could be. I think that arriving at that simplicity is the hardest thing to do in the world. So maybe, Pete, at the same time, it's something I'm proposing that is a part of excellence, but it's also a direct challenge to myself to always be pursuing it, right? It's something that you can reach out to or reach out for, but you may not always reach it, if that makes sense. Um, so if I'm walking through life with a little bit more humility every day, or maybe it goes with your word about learning, right? And trying to advance that way, and I'm treating people, properly and with kindness. If I'm also sort of compassionate to myself, if I'm aware of things that are going on, and boy, if I have clarity on purpose of what I'm doing, whether that's with entrepreneurs or my children or the players on the U9, U10 soccer team that I coach, if I'm asking a friend for a favor, there's a lot of different scenarios, but I'm always thinking about simplicity in terms of humility. One other point on this, it has a very material, sort of physical meaning for me as well. Um, there's an element of this that, borders on what folks have been calling minimalism. I wouldn't call myself a minimalist, but I've reduced my clothing over the past years because I want to be super simple with what my flow is every day. I also don't want to err on the side of, sort of materialism. So it's a reminder of myself and to myself to remain simple, even physically and materially, to achieve that. I'm not saying, I deprive myself or deprive the children of, soccer cleats or another pair of running shoes. I think it's a way of saying if I'm going to do something, I want to pursue quality above everything. I want to go deep on that as opposed to filling my plate with lots of things I can't handle. So if I could walk with a little bit more humility through a lot of those things on a daily basis, that's a big reminder for me and a big challenge. So I hope that gives some good insight and background.
Yeah, I love it. I love it for a lot of reasons. One, simplicity resonates with me right off the bat, but the way that you've defined it, one thing that you said is, yeah, it's a part of excellence, but it's also It's in the pursuit, not necessarily in the outcome. And I almost liken that or compare that to mastery, right? The pursuit of mastery. I heard someone explain it as mastery is always a mile further down the road from where you are. And I think a lot of folks might get tormented by that and feel like, oh, I'll never reach it, so let me just not. But I think, Danny's almost inviting us to more intrigue about sort of never being there, but instead focusing on the process, the pursuit of mastery, or in this case, simplicity. So for you, simplicity as it relates to excellence isn't necessarily a destination, an outcome, or even a noun. It's more an action. It's more a becoming. Am I on base with that?
Yeah, we could go into sort of the philosophical side of it, or the Stoic or the ancients side of this, but I would say it's a way of walking through the world, for me. Constant reminder to be as simple as possible, even if I'm getting anxious, and I'll put it out there. I used to be on medication for anxiety and stuff like that. I came from that point of stress before, dealt with a lot in my life, a little bit. And, it's a reminder to say, okay, let's just be a little bit more simple here. Let's figure this out. Maybe it's taking a breath. Maybe it's calling somebody to figure out to talk things out for 10 minutes. What's the simple step I could take? So it's a way of sort of walking through life.
Love that. It's a way of walking through the world, you said, or it's a way of walking through life. And I think especially in 2021, and I can't imagine 2022 or 23 is going to be any better, but we are bombarded with so many distractions, so many advertisements, so many opportunities, so many possibilities, so many decisions that we are bombarded all day long. And so as a way to sort of put to rest or put at bay some of the distractions that could possibly bring us off our highest pursuit and feeling best, Danny leans into this idea of simplicity, which is very much a verb for him. It's very much an action of becoming, not necessarily a destination for which he's striving. I think that's fantastic. Now, philosophically, you and I spent a lot of time, we talked philosophically, but we also spent a lot of time of sort of transitioning from the philosophy into the application. So for those who are listening, how do you put this to work for you? You've already mentioned it here and there as part of your description of simplicity, but take us maybe through a component of your day or a practice or a habit or a behavior. How do you put simplicity to work for you?
Great question. I'd say overall it's shifting at times, and always figuring out what windows, what behaviors, what habits enable me to just have a focus on what I'm doing. It could be at that time, whether that's with a teammate, whether it's executing on something, whether it's planning, whether it's assessing, whether it's spending time with myself or others. We were at dinner last night with a neighbor that just randomly came over. She interrupted the conversation and said, "Wow, man, the Potocki family they're really great listeners. My gosh, like we're being asked all these questions and I love it. We're learning a lot about each other. And, we've known that individual and their family for a long time, and we still have to learn about each other that way. So I think your word, by the way, is maybe spot on. I'm going to think about this and write about it. But if I have pockets of focus that I can plan out and that I schedule, and I think it's part of habits, then I'm walking into that meeting super focused on that. And I'm going to be simple in that meeting. I'm not going to be on 7 different platforms. Don't get me wrong. If my dad calls me because he doesn't call often during the day, I'm probably going to step out and answer the phone because it could be could be something there. But um, I'm going in like I used to, being a Division 1 athlete and playing some semi-pro summer ball and things like that. When I get in that box, that batter's box, I'm focused on that ball coming into my zone. Sports is a big metaphor for me. If I'm thinking about 7 things while I'm in that batter's box, I'm not going to perform. I'm not going to bring it. I'll be unfair to other people. So now, if I could, on top of this, bring a little bit more clarity, to those pockets of focus, if I could bring a little bit more ambition at times to those pockets of focus, I think I have a ways to go, always expanding in those moments. But, let's say it's pockets of focus. That's a big part of my daily plan and what I'm doing every day.
Pockets of focus. So, the more we dig with Danny on this idea of simplicity, the more we realize how many tentacles it has for him and how it lends itself well to a lot of other things. He just mentioned, I think, one of the most important, especially if you're talking about the human connection, and that's presence. We got so many of these distractions. We lack such focus and simplicity that it robs us of being truly and genuinely present when we show up. And if you create this level of simplicity or these pockets of focus, you're able to create greater intention and you're able to create greater presence and engagement when you're meeting with folks. And folks find that refreshing because they don't get that from many other folks. That's why the couple or the woman that Danny was with the other night, when they were together as a family, stopped him dead in his tracks and said, wow, hey, listen, appreciate you listening, appreciate you asking questions, because it's such a lost art, I believe. So I appreciate you touching on that, Danny.
It's funny that you mention it this way with presence, because I would say that this is almost exactly why I said dialogue as a number two that needs to be part of excellence. To be present with others, I would say more to have engagement with others. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these pockets of focus sort of times throughout my day, my mind is running a mile a minute. And there's still ebbs and flows of, you know, handling the stress and then feeling really good and overcoming challenges and working through. It's hard work every day. And I think everyone would agree that's never going to go away. It's part of solving problems in your community and in the world. And you should want to do things like that. I always think about it because, like I said, I was a baseball player. If it's the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, bases loaded, I'm saying to myself, hit me the ball. I want the ball, right? If I'm that point guard, I'm saying, give me the ball. So those are all good things to want. But if I'm too much in my own brain and I'm not in someone else's, then I think that's a barrier to solving problems and developing real solutions for other people. That's a big part of entrepreneurship for me. So dialogue to me is ask, right? Always be asking. What are you into? What do you want? What are you driving towards? What gets you going? What's a catalyst for you? What can improve? Whether this is about someone's life mentally or spiritually or physically, right? And, it's sort of body, mind, spirit, health, let's say. If I could help out as a friend that way or a family member or colleague. But it's also about the products we buy every day and the services that we come across and the type of experiences we have at, parks and sports and education. We have to be asking constantly. And a part of what I'm doing, if we're accelerating early companies and helping existing businesses grow, we're also coaching those founders and businesses to go out into the world and to ask people what they want, what's working and what's not. So it's directly connected to me with engagement. And by the way, if it's not a simple solution, it's going to be overcomplicated. It might not be able to work for a lot of people. So um, I don't know what your thoughts are. You're doing this every single day, dialoguing with other people.
It's beautiful, the transition seamless that you made, because everything's interrelated, right? Especially when you're talking about this idea of excellence. I asked Danny, hey, if we're having a conversation of excellence as we are, what are the three things that have to be a part of that conversation? And we started speaking, Danny's first word was simplicity. And we started to understand and unravel what that meant to him, how he leads with simplicity or how he leans into simplicity, how simplicity shows up for him, how simplicity allows him to show up better for others, which again transitioned us perfectly and seamlessly into his second word, which is dialogue. And you're saying dialogue is about asking. And it's a genuine ask, it's a curious ask. And I think most people have the intuition that If you're just asking questions because you feel like you have to, or if it's part of your sales process, people can sniff that out a mile away. So I think with asking and creating dialogue and engagement, there needs to be a level of sincerity. There needs to be a level of authenticity. So I feel like it comes very natural for you. So maybe this is an unfair question, but talk to me about sort of being authentically curious. Like, how do you foster being authentically curious? How do you foster dialoguing and asking questions with other folks and just being authentic and genuine and sincere about it, and maybe not doing it because it's what you ought to do or it's what you have to do?
Well, big question, big answer. It's one of the hardest things that I've done with the team that I work with. And the response is, and the perspective is, nothing is done solo. Everything's done together. So you foster dialogue, you foster authenticity, you foster creativity, you foster honesty through community. If you're having a dialogue one-on-one with someone, that's amazing. You can learn a lot about each other and you can help each other out. But if that one-on-one is a part of, like a plus network, right? A 1+1 network, and you can share the insights, or you can share the questions, share the needs, share the anxieties and the joys and the concerns with a community, man, that's going to get you so much farther, right? And you're going to be able to go deeper. I mean, there's data out there that shows that Strata, right? Like this workout app, every year they publish open data, which is like summarized on people's workouts for the year. As a baseline finding, people that work out together perform better than working out individually. It's the same kind of concept. If we could throw community and build community around whatever it is that you're doing, we're working with hundreds of businesses at a time. So we want to advise them, absolutely. But the real value is also in that peer to peer learning. I see it with students as well. There's conceptual development there, there's character development there. And if we had to put a word to it, Pete, with this community and dialogue, it's this triangle of sharing, right, where it really comes to a forefront. So if we can get to that point and larger community says, I want to share more about that, right? I want to share more about product development. I want to share more about building a team. Like, how are you doing that stuff? Then put it out there. It's a big part of our day-to-day operations. But if I'm sitting down with a family at dinner, I'm going to try to get to a point of focus that is all about sharing. And if we can make that a two-way street, I would love to do that every day. And sometimes, by the way, one thing I'd add, sometimes it's hardest for me to do it with myself. Right? If I'm meditating for 10 minutes every day, my biggest barrier could also be myself. And I'm not allowing myself to share authentically with other people because I'm trying to, have the answer or to fix it or, study something. So I'll get back to you. And I can be over analytical there. So if I'm at a point of sharing more and I'm comfy with that, I think I'll get better dialogue and I'll have probably better results all around.
You're speaking my love language here. You know what I think about dialogue. You know what I think about masterminding. You know what I think about connecting with kindred souls and spirits and working toward, similar aspirations. And as you were speaking, something came to mind that I want to share with those listening today. Shawn Achor is my favorite positive psychologist. Big Potential is great, but my favorite book of his is called The Happiness Advantage. But read this with me, if you will. And this is exactly one of the points that Danny was making. This is fascinating. It says, incredible research published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. The researchers found that if you are looking at a hill and judging how steep it is, the mere presence of social support around you transforms your perception. In fact, if you look at a hill while standing next to someone you consider to be a friend, the hill looks 10 to 20% less steep than if you were facing that hill alone. That's a stunning finding. Perception of your objective physical world is transformed by including others in your pursuit of achievement. This makes evolutionary sense. Other people provide resources and support. So mentally and physically, mountains seem more climbable, success is more achievable, and obstacles more surmountable with others around us. When I read that for the first time, it blew me away. It didn't surprise me much, but the fact that they have research on something like that is just so telling. And I'm wondering, are we leveraging that enough? Are we building our social architecture intentionally and deliberately enough? Are we surrounding ourselves with people who share common goals and common aspirations? Because, one thing I share with my clients all the time, I share this with anybody that'll listen. People are always looking for sort of the secret formula, the magic bullet, right? Everybody wants that sort of that shortcut or that hack. And if you're talking about growth and development, and I'll speak for myself, by far and away, the number one thing that has led and contributed to my growth and development, personally and professionally, is my mastermind group, is being involved with a well-run mastermind group. I was part of one in Maryland when I was living down there for 7 years, same guys, me and 3 others. Now I'm part of 2 different ones up here. To me, when I think about a mastermind group, a small, intimate group, the ability to get together and have dialogue, constructive, consistent dialogue around things as important as your progress toward things that are important to you and that you're working on, the challenges and the obstacles that you're running into, your breakthroughs or some of the things that you're learning, right? It's indispensable. Because I only know what I know. I only know what I've read, absorbed, experienced to this stage in my life. But if I surround myself with folks like a Danny Potocki, if I'm surrounding myself deliberately with people who share common goals and aspirations, the leverage, the morale, the camaraderie, the support, the insight that creates for me in my life is like rocket fuel as I journey towards the things that are important to me in my life. Any thoughts on that, Danny?
Yeah, I really want to pick up on your comment about social architecture, and are we creating or are we sustaining sort of the network or our own, sort of community of like-minded people to drive us? I think this is where dialogue is probably most important. It's this like constant mix of having those drivers in your life, right? The folks that you have shared values with, right? You're on the same page, totally get each other. But when you get really intimate with that, right? Like, my wife, Kimberly, is the biggest supporter, and because of that, also the biggest challenger in my life. Hey, that's not really you, right? You could be a little bit better there because she knows me so well. So having that shared values network is huge, and having people that really know you and are intimate that way with your mindsets and your behaviors. But at the same time, I'm always trying to have new conversations with new people who have, whether it's to me new values or different values or other values, whatever you want to call it, that's expansion. That's the learning that we've talked about. That's the challenge that someone needs to not remain static, to not remain linear, to not remain flat. And if we could pair that curiosity and that implementation, I'd like to say, the taking action on those things that you want to implement into your life with your already established shared values, things that could be objectively true forever, right? That are transgenerational in many ways. Love of family, taking care of nature, passing on to the next generation, things like that. That's a pocket of excellence for me right there. Those are the conversations of excellence for me. Someone else's values, someone else's life, someone else's learnings. I want to just eat those up all day. And, if we're being honest, there's a lot of tension in those moments and in those areas of engagement right now. I'm always thinking myself, am I having real dialogue? How can I be better at that? Most times it's a simple answer of just have the conversation and take that step together. But there's a ton of value that I've seen in questioning and being open to being questioned. And that's where real dialogue is for me. I'd like to think I'm a better husband, father, and business person because of it. And I bring as much of that as possible to the classroom, when I'm teaching undergraduate and graduate students in entrepreneurship.
Fantastic. There was one thing that you shared, and I want to go a little bit deeper on it before we transition into your third and final word on excellence. You had said that it's so important for you constantly be meeting with new people, new minds, exchanging new insights, hearing different perspectives or vantage points. And I couldn't agree more. Now, one thing that I focus on heavily, consistently for myself, and one thing that I help my clients to be more conscious and deliberate about is, again, building that social architecture. And I think there's a sweet spot. And I'm wondering if you agree with me on this, Danny. I think there's something to be said about the consistency of some of the relationships in your life. And there's something to be said about, I don't know if it's the spontaneity, but the newness, having new conversations with new people and learning new insights. I think if it's all new, well, the folks that you're meeting, there might be new ideas and insights exchanged, but maybe there isn't the same context because they didn't have sort of that body of a relationship of having gotten to know you or understanding where you're coming from in the last year or quarter or month. And so I think there's great value in the new relationships because there's new insights, there's new ideas, there's new synergies explored. I think there's great value to that. Also, there's great value. Like, for instance, I referenced my mastermind group. There was a group of 3 men down in Maryland that I was with for 7 years. And now my 2 masterminds here are going on 3 years now. And so the constancy and the consistency of them being able to see, hey, what is Pete consistent with? What is Pete sort of working on? What is Pete struggling with? I think there's great value there. So I think for those listening, when you're building your social architecture, featuring part constancy, folks that you're meeting with on a regular, consistent basis, and then certainly adding that spice of those new conversations so that you can add in new ideas, new insights, and of course, explore new synergies. I'm wondering if you have a thought on that, Danny.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that this is sort of seems like such a seamless conversation today of excellence because I think you're touching a lot on the last that I proposed, which is habit. I think habit itself was really a mix of what you said is, consistency in behaviors and things you're doing every day, but all of this newness or this testing, bringing those two together with anything in some ways will advance and sort of promote a healthier life, a more engaged life, and a stronger self and a stronger community. So I think you're thinking about it all the right ways. I think that there's component to this that we need to rediscover. I think we need all start with the assumption that we're all trying to figure out the same thing, how to be better humans together. And the folks that even can't think about being a better human, then, we got to help think for those people too, to help bring them along and carry the flag, as my colleagues would say when I worked in Washington, D.C. So I think it is a mix of consistency and sort of this newness and spontaneity. I've heard you talk a lot about spontaneity over the years, even testing with your own schedule, your own programming, your own habits, your own way of doing things. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that, but we could dive in even more here on habit.
The question that was asked again is, hey, Danny, if we're having a conversation of excellence as we are, what are the 3 things that have to be a part of that conversation for you? Danny said, number 1, simplicity. Number 2, which we just finished talking about, is dialogue. Transitioning to number 3, you mentioned habit, right? There's wonderful books. I read a book recently, Atomic Habits. I think you read it as well, Danny. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of thought leaders, right? The idea of habit is nothing new. What is new, or what I think is interesting, or where I think there's value in today's conversation, is understanding, why is this so meaningful to you? I mean, of all of the different aspects and elements of excellence, why do you feel like habit is something that has to be talked about if we're talking about excellence?
Well, the most practical or pragmatic answer is, as a philosophy undergrad and someone who studied even philosophy and international cultures for graduate school, I always had to come across Aristotle and specifically Nicomachean Ethics, which is sort of a staple book that I recommend to a lot of others. At times it could be, maybe somewhat dull given the type of writing, but I think Aristotle is a fundamental component of education that we all need to come across. So, he always would say excellence is a habit. If we're going to talk about excellence, we have to talk about habits. What he said is habits are what we repeatedly do. That makes us who we are, what we are repeatedly doing. I don't think it's only tactical and only logistical, but if I'm going to wake up every day and try to live a healthy, fulfilling life, and that's how we're, trying to define excellence in a little bit of a way there. I think there's a sense of ritual that goes along with that excellence. I think there's a sense of place that goes along with that, a place I can return to. But man, to our last point, there's a whole sense of spontaneity in that too. But I want to try to make the best of those things and the best of my days as much of a habit as possible. One thing growing up, no matter if my father was working an 8 to 4 shift as a police officer or a midnight to 8 shift or whatever it was, and sometimes that switched a lot, I'll tell you, we had dinner together every single night. That was a habit for the family, and you couldn't answer the phone, which was on a cord back then, one of those long cords back in the day. That was a simple habit, and boy, it taught me a lot, right? And we still do it with the kids every single night, unless, of course, for some, something that takes us out of that, that's, an exception. But that's a ritual, that's a sense of place. And I think habit as a part of excellence is a big part of becoming who you are, like Aristotle would say.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, excellence is what we repeatedly do. So excellence is not an act, it's a habit. And this really parallel to what we were saying before about simplicity. Simplicity is not necessarily an act or an outcome or a destination. It's the becoming. And I think anytime you're studying high level growth, high level development, it's more the act of becoming more so than it is any particular destination. So I'm right there with you. How do you put this to work for you? Is there anything that you can speak to around habit? Yeah, I think we've heard a lot of the staples, which don't make them any less significant, right? Fundamentals are fundamental for a reason. It's because they work. So if it is fundamental, by all means, share it. But how do you take what we know drives excellence, which we know is a big part of excellence, which is the idea of habit? How do you make that work for you?
It's marks every day that I have to hit, right? So if I'm eating well and drinking well, if I have good mood and I can have a habit that, helps me control that, if I move my body every day and I'm planning that a workout or maybe even moderate activity like walking or going for a hike or something, and if I'm communicating with other people and working hard, those are, at the highest level, those are the types of habits that I'm trying to enact every day and carry through on. And marks, by the way, I call them marks in my own life, in my own head. It comes from actually Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics too. That's why I mentioned it was a big book for me. But there's this concept of hamartia, which is an archery, a Greek word related to archery back in the day. And essentially the lesson is what helps you miss the mark, or what helps you hit the mark, or why are you missing the mark, right, in your life? And that might be with a virtue, right? It might be with patience, for example, something I've worked with or worked on for a while. So how am I hitting that mark, and what habit could get me to that mark, and what's going on in my life, probably a stressor that's making me miss that mark? And if I'm aware of that, and if that's a target for me, this simplicity, then I'm going to try to develop solid habits with that to enact every day. I've been really nervous at times about developing habits because I felt like I don't want to be that rigid. I'm not the guy that gets up at 5:01, and if I get up at 5:02, I've already missed the habit. But once I've started thinking about marks, okay, I've got to hit these things every day. That's what clicked for me. But boy, I'll tell you, there's still a lot of habits associated with those things. Meditating for 10 minutes every day, working out, moving my body for at least 30 minutes. And believe me, I have a workout plan with that. Transitioning to work and meetings. And there are rhythms throughout the day that if you ask me to meet at a certain time, I'm sorry, I just can't because I maybe even taken a 20-minute lunch break to read a poem, like I mentioned before. So I think there's a sense of ritual that we need to maintain. And, I think if we're losing a sense of ritual, I say that more as a lament, maybe of a wanting for that. But it's tough in today's world with the pandemic and virtual and digital to keep those connections with others and habits. So I have throughout my day things that I must do and things that I like to hit. And that drives me every day. But there's tough days too. So I think that gives maybe some meat for us to chew on there.
Marks, accountability, ritual, some level of schedule, integrity. Obviously being able to navigate that and make that, applicable to what's going on in today's environment, whether it's COVID or anything else, all a big part of the conversation when you're talking about habit. My closing thought here, excellence is what we repeatedly do. And in that idea, there's a suggestion of consistency. And I'll tell you what I think folks struggle with more than anything else is consistency. I think that is the greatest challenge that people have, whether it's in their marriages or the relationships that they have with their kids or their friends or their colleagues or their teams or their health, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, or their business or their finances. I think most people know what they need to do, regardless of what we're talking about. It's just the act of doing that with some level of consistency. And I want to share with those who are listening with us today, one thing that I heard that absolutely smacked me between the eyes when I heard it. It's from Jim Collins. He said, the signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency. And I was like, wow, that's one of those things you read and it just kind of slaps you upon the face because it's so true. And I put a little bit more of a positive spin on it and perhaps maybe more appropriate for our conversation on excellence today. I say, the signature of excellence is fanatical consistency, right? If the signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency, well, I think it's fair to assume that the signature of excellence is fanatical consistency. And again, I think that's the thing that people have the most challenge with. Two things quick that really done wonders for me in the way of consistency, both of which revolve around accountability. One is my own personal accountability, and then there's social accountability. So relative to personal accountability, to Danny's point, marks he mentioned. Okay, I keep an actual scorecard. I get very clear on either the activity, the habits, the behaviors, the practices that mean the most to me, that are the highest leveraged activity, whether it's for my health, my relationships, or my business. And I make certain to hold myself accountable to that on an actual scorecard, right? There's a study done that says that if you're regularly self-monitoring, you're 2.5 times more likely to achieve or execute than if you're not. And keeping score, as Danny said, keeping marks or having a scorecard is regular self-monitoring. You're 2.5 times more likely to execute or achieve if you're regularly self-monitoring. So that scorecard is one thing that has worked absolute wonders for me from a personal accountability standpoint. And then from a social accountability standpoint, I'll say it because we've already said it. It's having an accountability partner or a mastermind group. Because it's one thing if you're not hitting the mark and you're the only one that you're disappointing. But if you're part of some sort of social architecture, if you're part of some mastermind where week after week you're going in and you're saying, well, I know I said I was going to do this, but I didn't do it. I mean, if you have any level of integrity, it's only going to be a week or 2 or 3 of doing that and sort of feeling somewhat shameful or knowing that you're not bringing it before you say, hey, if I don't do anything this coming week, I'm going to do what I said to do because of that level of social accountability. So we know habits important. We know consistency is important. That's nothing new. But what we try and focus on is the implementation, making it applicable. For me, personal accountability, I keep a scorecard. Social accountability, I surround myself with people who know what I'm after and can hold me accountable to that and vice versa. Two things that have worked absolute wonders for me. Danny, anything in closing on either habit or dialogue or simplicity that we didn't cover?
I'd like to maybe wrap it all together. I know it's not the holidays, we're not going to sort of wrap it up and put it under the tree. For me, at least, I'm Christian, so it'd be Christmas for me. I think the habit is so directly connected to the simplicity. And there's a mantra that a really good friend of mine, Dan Mulroy, he got out as a U.S. Navy SEAL for over 10 years and traveled the world that way. He's been a business entrepreneur himself, worked with other companies as well. And he always says, advance the basic. Take that basic thing. Maybe you have to go slow with it at first, but actually focusing on that is advancing, right? Obviously, the language itself, too, shows it's almost like a military-esque type concept, right? Advance the basic. Just keep going over and over and over again. And to me, I think where it becomes concrete, one thing that you and I, Pete, have, talked about is we're always sharing like our biggest wins and maybe even some small wins. And a small win that's become a really big win for me that is advancing the basic is biking to work. When I go to the office in Kingston, New York, right? So when I go to New Rochelle office, I have to drive there and I plan those days. But if I'm biking to work and it's about a 12-minute bike, then I have to have time to pack my food. So if I start advancing the basic of biking to work, I'm getting a workout and it's a healthier part of living. But then guess what? I can't carry all this food and I don't want to spend $15 every day. So I'm packing my food better. I'm packing better food. Another basic. So other things start to happen. Well, guess what? If I want to pack the food, I got to be in that pocket of focus to put the kids to bed at the right time. Because I don't want to be packing my food at 11 o'clock at night, right? If I want to put the kids to bed, then I got to be home for dinner. I got to have work and I got to be focused on that work time, right? If I want to be focused for work, right, all these basics are now happening. I want self time in the morning, which leads me back to after packing the food. I got to have better sleep or the best sleep possible, right? And I want to be in bed by a certain window of time, right? Because we have a 1-year-old, so it ebbs and flows sometimes. But you see, Pete, and I've heard you talk a ton about this over the years, but if I'm advancing those basics, other things happen. Now, as a sports guy in the past, same thing in sports that relates to me, big metaphor for my life. You just play, right? And things start to happen. And guess what? It all comes back to the fundamentals. The first day that I learned how to really play basketball, I was probably a sixth grader, maybe seventh grader in my hometown. And my parents sent me to a basketball camp, Iona Prep, which is in New Rochelle, New York, Iona Preparatory School. And the first thing they taught was basketball is 3 fundamentals, right? You can dribble, you can pass, you can shoot. And it's the same kind of mindset for me. Like I said before, I'm in the batter's box and I'm focusing. Well, if I'm advancing these basics, other things are going to happen. And I think it will improve quality of life. So thanks for affording me the time today to dive into a lot of this stuff.
I love that. I love what we ended on. I think what we ended on might be the most important point to take away. Advance the basic. Danny mentioned baseball a few times throughout today's conversation. We're both big sports guys, in particular baseball. And I'd be remiss, especially since we're talking fundamentals and we're talking advancing the basic, not to share. I mean, if you're a Yankee fan, you love us. If you're not, maybe you're not liking us as much now. But I heard this quote about Jeter, and it's so appropriate for what we're talking about. It says, that's the beauty of Jeter. He built a spectacular career on mastering the most basic fundamentals of the game. He wasn't the best, the fastest, the best fielder. You could make an argument he was the best hitter, but if you looked at how he carried himself, if you looked at what he meant to that franchise and to the city of New York and to Yankee fans all around the world, the beauty of him is he built this amazing first ballot Hall of Fame career on mastering the most basic fundamentals of the game. And again, I think along with the inconsistency that people struggle with, I think we get too far removed from fundamentals. If we're talking your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, we're talking your business and whatever you do, we're talking skiing, we're talking managing, investing, there are fundamentals. There are certain key drivers that just carry a little bit more weight. How clear are you on what they are? How committed are you to their consistent execution? Hey, a lot of good stuff today. This was my first conversation of excellence, and I couldn't have picked somebody better, somebody who's very near and dear to my heart, someone that I've learned a lot from, Mr. Danny Potocki. I really appreciate you joining me today and working with me through this. I'm definitely going to have you back on. Before we jump off, Danny, just for those listening or those who want to connect with you, can you just let people know where they can find you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Danny Potocki. You can always check me out there, sharing some stuff. And that's connected to the Hudson Valley Center for Innovation Instagram account as well. We have a lot of stories up there and forthcoming. The website where you can learn a little bit more about what we're doing is www.hvci.org. We're actually this past week updating it, but it will be live again by the end of June. And we're so happy to be putting out into the world how we're helping, students and startups and small businesses to be better entrepreneurs in today's economy. So I just love the time together. I always get so much out of the conversations. And, if others want to reach out, feel free to connect with Pete if you can't get me direct or lose something, and I'll circle back with you.
I love you, man. I appreciate you more than you know. Him and I and a couple others are actually going on a hike tomorrow. So we're going to be able to spend some more time tomorrow out in nature, simplicity, dialoguing, building positive habit, doing all the things that excellence requires and demands of us. Danny, I appreciate you today. And for those of you who are listening, if you enjoy this, like it, share it, subscribe. We're going to be having more of these conversations of excellence. We look forward to seeing you real soon.